Okay.
Welcome, everyone.
Oh, hi.
Welcome on this icy but not quite as snowy as it could have been day. And we just welcome everyone who could be with us and who took some big chances to make the trip this way so we can be here in person. And we know that you're here from across the country also, and appreciate your tuning in to us. It's another somber day and beginning as we think about folks in Rhode Island and folks in Australia where needless violence has occurred. We'll be talking about this soon. But I would like for us to just take a moment to meditate with prayer. We'll look to it, Psalm 34, verse 19. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord rescues them from them all. God of compassion and hope, we gather carrying the weight of loss, uncertainty, and the challenges of our world. Be present with us in honest conversation and attentive listening. Bless those who share their stories today. Give them courage, wisdom, and grace. Open our hearts to recognize hope, not as denial of pain, but as strength that grows within it and calls us toward justice, healing, and community. In Christ's name, amen. I will, and we're rejoicing that the panel can be with us. And Venus, I'm going to let you introduce folks.
I'm sorry, I need you.
I will let you introduce the panel.
Oh, right, well, the panel's gonna introduce themselves.
Okay.
As, just before they speak, I can say your names if you want. This is Sue Gibson. Hi. Rob Bamberger and Michael Gibson. And this is an ongoing panel. We talked about loneliness before. We're dealing with hope now, and we'll have other featured topics in the future. The thing about hope, you know, it's interesting. I was in the hospital the other day for just a checkup, and there was a big sign up about hope right in as you walked in the door. And I was reading a book it's called The Last Thing to Go is Hope, but it's also one of the most important feelings that people have to have. In the 60s, the farm workers formed a federation and a union, and one of the things they would say was that if you lose hope, you lose everything. So it tells you what an important feeling and sense and attitude one has to have in order to maintain it. And I know in my field, which is the mental health field, that one of our major responsibilities to create a sense of hope for people and to give them that sense that things will improve. So I know how important it is in all of our lives, and each of the panel members is going to address some aspect of it. So you want to start, Susan?
I will. I'm Susan Gibson. Let's see, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a local. I grew up here in Potomac, Chevy Chase. I have a BA in education from Mount Vernon College, George Washington University, and MA in marriage and family counseling. Worked with mostly women and children and families. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about women and hope. So I'm going to read a little bit to you as we go, and then we'll talk a little bit later off my little thing here. First, I want to thank Venus and the committee and inviting me. It just means so much. And thank you for coming out today on this really snowy day. What is hope? Is it an act of belief, an unknown strength, a purpose? It's more than optimism. Optimism says things will probably turn out just fine. Hope says, even in the hardest times, change is possible. Hope is active. It requires discipline, courage, relentless perseverance. Throughout history, women of every culture, age, faith, tradition have shown us what it means to live with hope and courage and purpose. I brought a picture today to share with you. It's kind of fragile. But this is my grandmother, and her name is Flavia. And she came from Italy through Ellis Island, and she moved here and actually lived off of Fernwood. She was a real inspiration to me. In another period, I made a documentary of my thesis and my graduate work, and I will be sharing it hopefully with you guys in the spring. So her story is quite extraordinary. The reason I brought Flavia into this conversation is she was a very young woman with 3 small children when my grandfather died unexpectedly. With no roadmap, no guarantees, no partner to lean on, she turned towards her faith, her family, and the circle of women who refused to let her face life alone. They became her strength when she had none left. They carried her emotional, spiritually, and practically. That community of women gave her the gift of hope, hope to move forward, hope to rebuild a life, and hope to keep believing in herself. She became my earliest and most personal model of what hope looks like in real life. And I have to tell you, Venus being one of them, there are women in my life that have given me great hope. But my grandmother, Flavia, really was the one that I went to when I needed hope in my own life. Around the world, other women have embodied the same fierce hope that Flavia did. Now, I'm going to have to try to say her name. Malala, help me, Rob.
Yes.
Yousafzai, right? She's a teenager in Pakistan. We all know her. She was shot in a simple act of going to school. Yet instead of silencing her, that violence amplified her voice. Today, she's a global activist for education, reminding us that one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. Her story shows us that hope is not just survival, it's transformation. Sometimes it looks a little quieter, but no less powerful. Rosa Parks changed history simply by keeping her seat on a Montgomery, Alabama bus. That moment of quiet defiance sparked a movement that reshaped America. She later said, "I have learned over the years that when one's mind is made up, this diminishes fear." The decision to sit was an act of extraordinary hope. Harriet Tubman, currently I'm living on the Eastern Shore, so Harriet Tubman we hear so much about. She offers another form of courage, the courage to lead others to freedom. At tremendous personal risk, guided by deep faith, she escaped slavery and returned again and again and again to lead others out. She said simply, "I never lost a passenger." Her hope wasn't only for herself, it was her entire community. And lastly, hope can also be expressed through words that heal. Maya Angelou, the poet, the singer, the activist, turned hardship into art that still uplifts and strengthens. She once said, "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." Her resilience teaches us that hope is not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain have the final say. So what do all these women have in common? They faced hardship, rejections, loss, and overwhelming odds, and still they chose hope. Not fragile hope, but fierce, steady, enduring hope. Hope that heals and lifts up others. Hope that sparks movements and changes history. And that's our invitation today, to carry hope into our own families, our own communities, our church, and our own worlds. Hope is not passive. Hope is active, resilient, and contagious. When we live with courage and purpose, we become bearers of hope for others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm Rob Bamberger. After a long career in public policy, I went back to school to get an MSW. I'm interested in aging and elder care issues, and since I have to do full disclosure, some of you may be accustomed to hearing me on Saturday nights over WAMU. It was a short night, let me tell you. Without a doubt, preparing something to say to you on the subject of hope has been one of the hardest tasks I've ever been assigned. And I do say assigned with due deliberateness because I don't remember volunteering for it. Do either of you? My hope was that the work would be divided and Susan and Michael would be assigned to talk about hope and hopelessness, or hope, and I could talk about hopelessness and misery because I thought that would be the easier part of this.
Trying to just
Adjust.
I thought that was a critical voice. I recognize that I'm feeling despair before I feel it keenly. I happen to collect sound recordings, and I'll notice that I've put in a large order for CDs, or I'll be bidding frantically for something on eBay that I don't really have to have. Another giveaway is that I start buying supplements. You know, I'll read something that promises, you know, great results if you begin to take it. It's like the ads that we saw as kids for PF Flyers that promised if we wore the shoes, we'd run faster, jump higher. My latest supplement is something called oil of oregano with garlic and turmeric, holy basil, and of course, the little D3 and E. Restores hope. No, doesn't say that. But I'm now on my second bottle, and since taking it, my friends say they like having me over because I go so well with chicken and fish. And certain wine pairings. Now, a more serious manifestation of that kind of despair is I'll catch myself not feeling very invested in posterity. And I imagine this is because we've seen how vulnerable truth has become, institutions in history, how cheaply some people will sell and surrender their integrity and sovereignty. And it's disturbing. So thinking about what to say this morning, I kept falling back on to say, well, what other choice do we have than to harbor some iota of hope if we're to function day to day in the current soundtrack of our lives? And the idea that some of you would come out of your snow-covered neighborhoods this morning to hear me say that really kindled a great deal of shame. And I came to realize that taking that position was perhaps being captive of the feeling of hopelessness and not thinking about its meaning. What does feeling hopeless mean? How do we frame it? To borrow a scientific concept, what is the valence of hopelessness? And that started to take me down a more helpful path, at least one with a couple of service clauses along the way. I think the first thing is to speculate about the appreciation of life that we couldn't have if we weren't also informed by death and loss. I think about what gets illuminated and appreciated about harmony in music by the presence of dissonance, to recognize that there is something of a coexistence of life and death, hope and hopelessness. And they're not just separate, as I say, they can be indivisible, which reminded me of the whole notion of sweet and sour, where they inform one another. In the case of sweet and sour, there's even a word of that mutual informing, and that the word is bittersweet. In short, we'd be incomplete if we did not know hopelessness. Now, I have to take you back a few decades, well, several decades, back to when I was a history major in the first half of the 1970s. I became very interested in the journalist and writer Walter Lippmann, who led a remarkable life. He was born in 1889. By the age of 23, he'd written his first book, which struck me as a great ambition that I fell so far, have fallen 50 years short of. And in 1914, he was one of the founders of the New Republic. And a few years later, accompanied Woodrow Wilson to the peace conference in Versailles, an experience that led to some disenchantment. And for many years, while a columnist, he lived in Washington, D.C., in Cleveland Park on Woodley Road, across from the cathedral. And I have to share some things he wrote over the years, which have always been rather helpful to me. In the mid-50s, he wrote a slim little book called The Public Philosophy, in which he said, the ideals of the good life and the good society fall far short of perfection. And he cautioned against speaking of worldly ideals in superlative terms. He said, quite the contrary, worldly ideals are concerned with the best that is possible. He argued that ideals don't exist up in the sky. All of the ideals we hold about things like freedom and justice and consent, he said, are aware of the earth. They're not celestial, they're earthy, which is, I think, what he means about saying worldly ideals. At the end of his second book, 1914, a book called Drift and Mastery, he wrote, only with a struggle does the affirmative ideal emerge. And from that, back in the mid-70s, I took the notion that we shouldn't judge ourselves by whether or not we reach the ideal, but only that we, albeit in fits and starts, keep approaching those ideals, that is our ambition, and we're judged by the sincerity of the effort and not necessarily whether the ideal is achieved in absolute terms. It may not be possible to achieve it, but we cling to the possibility that we can get closer to it all the time. And I would submit to you that that is hope. To be without hope is also, I think, to ignore the sweep of history. 8 years after Drift and Mastery, Lippmann, contemplating the war and what he had experienced at Versailles, wrote a wonderful treatise about the use of propaganda in World War I and the necessity for reason in governance. It was a book called Public Opinion, published in 1922, in which he urged for a view of the world that outlasts our own predicament. We can do this all the better if we do not allow frightfulness and fanaticism to impress us so deeply that we throw up our hands peevishly and lose interest in the longer run of time because we've lost faith in the future of mankind. Well, any consideration of history will tell us that this period is not forever, because our history is littered with eras and periods, and this will someday be another era among them. And we have to also remember that our nation's history is 250 years, so that I think this particular period, this descent into authoritarianism, occupies a much larger emotional space than it would for people in Europe or Asia who are contemplating a history that are multiple times longer than our own. We're in such distress that I don't think we allow ourselves the luxury of stepping back and observing and experiencing the current state of affairs from a distance. I'm frequently reminded of the story attributed to any number of big band vocalists who, appearing at a convention of record collectors or a gathering of a nostalgia convention some years later, get peppered with questions about what was it like to be a singer, a canary with one of the bands, and how did you happen to be the first to record a particular hit record, and what was that trumpeter really like? And finally, one of these vocalists sort of threw up their hands and said, you know, if I'd known I was part of history, I would have spent less time on the bus sleeping. And I'll submit to you that we should sleep less on the bus because people coming later will ask us about these days, and the value of memory will be a function of self-awareness. So we must leave ourselves open to observe and to observe ourselves in the midst of this. And I think a large measure of despair is that we don't think we'll live long enough to see this era pass. And there I think of that day back in 1980 when Mount St. Helens blew, and everybody thought its landscape would stay barren for decades and decades. And yet scientists visiting it weeks later saw little sprouts of something called fireweed, beetles scampering about. And you look at photos, maybe even just 10 years after, and the vegetation is coming back, and so is the wildlife. So one last insight from Walter Lippmann, if we take from Mount St. Helens the possibilities for rejuvenation, for the barren to flourish again, and to use your word, Susan, for the resilience of posterity, and that it does indeed still matter. Lippmann wrote in Public Opinion, which is a book, as I say, a few years older than even Dick Van Dyke. He wrote, "What we have seen was Berlin, Moscow, Versailles in 1914 to 1919, not Armageddon. Great as was the horror, it was not universal." And so he concluded, "You can despair of what has never been, but you cannot despair of any human quality which a human being has exhibited. And if amidst all the evils of the decade, you have not seen men and women, known moments that you would like to multiply, the Lord himself cannot help you." This is a passage I've read a number of times over the decades because it calls for a faith in a future that we cannot see, but in which it's clear we are believing, because every day we're endeavoring to come closer to that more affirmative vision. And if we step back far enough to observe this pursuit and the sincerity with which we engage in the pursuit, I think we come to a recognition that this is the manifestation of the hope that harbors within all of us. We've neither deserted hope, nor has hope given up on us. It's been riding their shotgun all the time.
Hopelessness and hope are not mutually exclusive opposites. In fact, it's normal occasionally to feel hopelessness. And over the last year, I know that many of us have felt hopelessness seemingly nonstop. But in order to transcend hopelessness, it is vital that you name it and that you honor your feelings of hopelessness without simultaneously being consumed by them. As with any uncomfortable emotion, you should never deny that feeling. Were you to deny your feelings of hopelessness, you could inadvertently let it pull you deeper into that hole of interlocking impossibilities in which you race ahead from the present moment to make predictions about the rest of your life that assume the hopelessness won't subside, and then you bank on that and build further on it. Instead, it's best simply to welcome hopelessness like we would welcome a guest. Because the truth is, if you don't welcome hopelessness, it will just keep asking you for its attention. And by extension, it can become a permanent resident in your mind. It makes me think of that old Saturday Night Live sketch where about the guest that wouldn't leave. Anyway, at the same time, though, it's a mistake to project hope beyond what is actually possible. For this, too, is a recipe for eventual disappointment and disillusionment. Unrealistic expectations not only turn our focus toward a mirage in the distance, but just as importantly, they keep us from embracing whatever moments of comfort and joy might show up for us in the here and now. Focusing on unrealistic expectations in a distant past can also prevent us from making realistic choices about important topics that we may need to face, like medical decision making. The best course is to stay grounded in the here and now. And by concentrating on what's happening in this present moment, we can avoid dwelling on the past or worrying excessively about the future. Paradoxically, once we acknowledge our feelings of hopelessness, we open up space for ourselves for hope, for compassion, and for emotional stability. And one of the things that I think is really important to keep in mind is that a key ingredient in the process for finding hope is to ask for help. By asking for help, we demonstrate that we're not in this alone, but instead are in community with those whom we can trust. In fact, our Judeo-Christian tradition teaches us that God designed us to be in community. I think this is best seen in Ecclesiastes 4, verses 9 to 10. Two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. We experience loss of hope most deeply when we find ourselves outside of whatever community we see ourselves in. For outside of community, we think that there is no one to help us up, that we are the only ones who feel despair. The Quakers have an expression that they will hold you in the light. It is a communal notion derived from Numbers 6, verses 24 to 25. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you. When the Quakers hold someone in the light, they're asking God both to be with the person for whom they are praying and to be with themselves in their caring for that person. Or to put it another way, they're asking God to help their love reach those for whom they're praying. And I think the Quakers can teach us something very important here, that the only way to find hope is through community. In times like we're currently experiencing, we certainly don't need to be eternal or irrational optimists. But as long as our hope is grounded in realism, it serves many positive functions in our lives. Personally, my own stance in these times has been to become a hopeful pessimist. For hope is an essential component of our well-being. And when it seems to be in short supply, the first step in regaining hope is to practice gratitude by spending a few moments each day recounting the positives in your life. These may have to be baby steps at first, like noticing a moment of serenity in the sunshine or the rush of some endorphins on a brisk walk around your neighborhood. But once you've taken those baby steps, you can begin to actively envision some realistic ways that your circumstances may improve. That is when pain and discomfort often begin to subside. Even deep sorrows can pass with time. The best course is to be mindful and deliberate about fostering positivity, even when it seems to be completely absent. In this way, hope can spring from hopelessness. Now, Venus asked me to talk about a personal experience, and I told her that I have lived.
Introduce yourself while you're talking.
I'm Michael Gibson. I go to this church. Okay. And I'm on the adult ed committee. And I have no idea why I'm up here with these superstars here, but anyway, it's nice. Anyway, I told Venus that I've lived such a charmed life that I couldn't think of anything. But as Venus is wont to do, she pushed me and pushed me until I finally said, well, there is my father. So here goes. When he died at the terribly young age of 66, my father was my best friend. He was a Homeric character. He had signed a contract with the New York Yankees right before World War II, and he probably would have been the catcher after Bill Dickey, a role that Yogi Berra obviously took on instead. After my father's knees had suffered a horrible beating when his ship was bombed during the Allied invasion at Salerno. But he was also first in his family to complete high school, and he was first in his family to complete college, and he became chair of the history department at the University of Oklahoma. He authored 25 full-length books on the American West and Native Americans, and he finished second in the balloting for the Pulitzer Prize in History in 1970. And yet, my father never failed to drop whatever he was doing if I ever called. I had tremendous difficulty coming to terms with his death because I just could not find hope in a world that did not have him in it. Three things got me through it. First of all, one of my dad's closest friends pulled me aside and told me this: you will get over the pain, but you will never get over the loss. Secondly, my wife, my eldest daughter, Alicia, and my sisters provided care and support to me in my grief. And third, my daughter Grace was born a few months after my dad's funeral. Now, those three things together enabled me to see myself no longer as a guy who felt pain that no one else had ever felt before, but instead to know that I was a part of a community that supported me so much that there could be hope when before there had only been hopelessness. I want to close with two things that might help us put our sense of hopelessness in context. The first is a book that you might consider reading by Paul Watzlawick. Its title is "The Situation is Hopeless, but Not Serious." This book taught me that it's almost always helpful to find humor in terrible circumstances, even if all you have left is gallows humor. The second thing is a passage from one of my novels set in World War II, Leaving Pontotoc County. Now, that book explores the challenges that women faced day in and day out with their husbands and fathers and sons and boyfriends gone, and the fear that they had to endure every single day that those men would be killed in battle, or even worse, that the U.S. would suffer defeat and they would become captives of our enemies. This is how they tried to fight hopelessness. The bond that Phyllis and Meredith had formed was certainly not one of dependence. After 20 months of living alone, Phyllis had acquired far more independence than she was sure she would ever need. Instead, Their bond had been forged on maintaining hope. Hope had rapidly become the scarcest commodity in the country. And just like all the other young wives in America, Phyllis and Meredith constantly teetered on losing what little hope remained for them. Through their correspondence after Pearl Harbor, Phyllis and Meredith attempted a nearly impossible feat to supply enough encouragement to each other that neither would ever lose hope. So that's all I have to say, but I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Yes, we're gonna take questions, but I want to thank the panel for a very stimulating and effective conversation. I'm so lucky to have these people that will listen to me.
You don't give us any choice.
Yeah, I know. So I want to open it up to people in terms of if you have questions, thoughts. Doesn't have to be a question. I'm sorry, Carol.
I'm looking at the chat, people,
Oh.
want to
Okay.
reply remotely.
So if you're on and you want to put a question in the chat, you can do that as well. So.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'll go first. So those born after 1945 have a specter that nobody before us had, and that is nuclear war. When the US bombed Japan, it separated history in a sense. And we who've grown up after that point, we have hope, and we look towards the future, but there's always that sense of what if or it could be. And yet we move forward with the idea that we will have a better world. And where we're currently today, we're still facing that sense of now it's changed. Not as many people are afraid of that, but climate change has become the big,
yeah, it's a really big thing.
I mean, our Earth itself is changing. And yet we still endeavor to find hope. I read recently, I guess last year, a book called Life After Doom. And by Brian McLaren. And it was really good because it touches on what you all have been saying. But it's also like we think that there's going to be this doomsday, and yet not everybody falls into that. So I think it's really an interesting idea that, we have to just march forward, keep living day by day, and live with the idea that, well, we've got these big existential threats, but we can keep going forward. And we, as Brian McLaren said in his book, Life After Doom, okay, we've got climate change on the horizon, but every time you save a bird species, or you help a sea turtle, or you do something positive, or you clean up the weeds in your local park, you're doing something, and it can help you feel empowered to keep going forward. So that's just my
Thank you.
contribution.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, let's see, in the chat, John Gaffney. He just said this is, and here's a comment. This is among the very best thought-provoking and informative adult sessions that we've had. Thank you. Yeah. But other comments?
Steve?
I think very much implicit in what both Diane and Michael were saying is that hope is an act of will. And that if you don't decide that you are going to or you can make a difference, or we collectively can make a difference for the better, that's when hopelessness takes over. In the case of nuclear war, I'm a retired diplomat, and I think the greatest achievement of my profession has been that since 1945, despite much temptation and many opportunities, nobody has used nuclear weapons. And on a micro level, Michael was talking about an individual grief. Almost 20 years ago, I had a really serious injury. I fell and I ruptured the tendons in both of my knees, which left me in inpatient rehab with double surgery and unable to walk. At age 60, I had the privilege of learning how to walk again. We had an orthopedics gym in the rehab center, and I was probably in the best shape of anybody in it. And we consciously, as patients, decided that we were going to be happy and that we were going to encourage each other to improve to the extent that we could. And there was one woman and I who, at the point when we were able to get to using walkers, it wasn't just walking around the rehab gym. We were doing laps in the Indianapolis 500. That was the image that we had. The happiest person in the gym was the one who was in absolutely the worst shape. She had been hit by a car and she was paraplegic. She was a Filipino immigrant whose husband had not been able to get a visa to come and be with her. She had no family here to support her. But she had the biggest smile and she just celebrated getting that hand to work on the control of the power wheelchair. And she cheered everybody else on. When somebody climbed that first step on a set of stairs, she was there to cheer them on. And it became an incredibly positive thing in this place that should have been full of despair. But it was an act of will on the part of all of us.
Thank you. That's a wonderful story, because I think that's true. And the whole notion of community group and having anyone by your side really matters,
Yes.
Yeah.
really matters.
Yeah, that is true. You know, you think about Job and we're gonna talk about the Odyssey another time, but you think about Job and you know, he had no idea what to do. He was so upset, most righteous guy, got all this terrible things happening to him. And he had these three knuckleheads that came and talked to him, you know? And they said they had absolutely nothing useful to say, but they were there.
That's right.
And I think that's the whole point of community. You know, you together, you can get through a lot of things. Individually, you can't. And once you are together, it makes a heck of a difference, heck of a lot of difference. Yeah.
Joni Brown just commented, it's so hard for depressed people to maintain hope. Therefore, it's hard to live with or around depressed people. But community is so important. And, yeah. This time of year, it gets to be all the more, I don't know, important because we're looking at, you know, what the possibility that some little baby born to some, you know, woman that people didn't even know about, that person could have had so much effect on other people.
Sure.
Yeah, and this time of year, I mean, as Susan was talking, I face pretty horrible tragedy very early in life. And if it hadn't have been for my mother and my grandmother, who had already also had really terrible tragedy, I don't think I would have had the hope. And this community, as I rode up the elevator at NIH on Thursday, with a woman who turned to me and she said, "Did you have lymphoma?" And I said, "Yeah, I have lymphoma, but it was 4 years ago." And she said, "Well, I've made it a year and my prognosis had been 2, and I'm still hopeful, but it was through this community that I received the diagnosis, I received the support, and I'm here today." So, it really does make a difference. The community really does, and it really helps to ask for help. But, you know, I didn't have to ask in some respects. Joni Friend was over at my house before, as soon as the diagnosis came across, but you've all been so helpful. Anyway, yeah, and also, Peggy Hartman said, this is why I attend Bradley Hills every week.
This is why, what, sorry.
This is why. Yeah.
They know after the Second World War that prisoners that were able to form one relationship with somebody survived better than anybody. They just needed one relationship to keep them going. Really makes an enormous difference.
Yeah.
So could I sort of, I'm looking around the room and we're all in the same demographic. So I'm thinking about the Gen Zers. My son is a Gen Z. And how isolated they are now because we've all emphasized, community, even that single relationship. So tools, how to help people in your life that are in this gen to form those, that find that community, not online community. We're not talking about an online community. That's not, you go down rabbit holes of algorithms and you'll not find very much hope there. But sort of to help them navigate this, because I just don't know that they even have the skill set in many respects.
I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because I also have a son who's 36 and is single and, working all the time. And we had a really honest conversation one day, and it just kind of, it is a different time for them, isn't it? Some of his friends have coupled up. He said, Mom, I've already missed the first marriage. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know.
My life is over.
It is tough. I think opening up that conversation. And then I've given just mom strategy stuff, but just some we just had a conversation and some ideas, like, have you gone to he works at a college, have you gone to the faculty things, stuff that we just take for granted, socially, the way we've been socialized, to get that started. It's like, oh gosh, Mom, I didn't think I should go to the faculty staff Christmas party. I was like, yeah, Matt, go. And it really, it said, Matt, it was great, Mom, it was great, So maybe just talking openly, and it's almost like they needed, suggestions of how to get together.
Right.
Because they are splintered too, college friends, and they're all over the place. So that just, I know it's sort of obvious, but they kind of need that obviousness,
You're still parenting.
I am so
And also, overseas. I guess, our parents lived through World War II, and that was horrible and awful, but we've lived through the pandemic, and these younger people lived, that's an experience that was, I know there was the flu, and apparently my grandfather almost died and all of that, so they had that experience, but this pandemic thing, in addition to what we're going through administratively or whatever, it's hard to measure, and it.
Yeah, the impact.
And we're having a real hard time cracking out of the boxes that we were in during that pandemic.
Yeah, imagine not being able to go to school.
Yes.
That is a really major impact on the young people. Terrible.
Yeah, we were just with a child that, was a refugee child and started school early age during the pandemic. And they didn't basically have school for 2 years.
Yeah, right. No.
And we don't always remember that. It's sort of like, oh, we thought things are normal. Well, what's normal now? Because that was part of the factor. What things are like. Yeah. So breaking out, we probably need a lot of tools to try to figure out how to do that.
The nudges. That behavioral theory is, I don't know how effective it is, but nudge.
Effective.
Yeah. So
I will drag him to golf lessons in the spring because all his work colleagues play golf. And I said, well, how to be with the club
That's perfect.
and drum up business for For the firm, as it were. Well,
Yeah, talking about the fractured nature, I'm going back now to show how old I am, but, in like early 1980s, I was, a volunteer counselor at the Suicide and Crisis Center in Dallas. And, so, we answered, phone, talked to people and, had a sort of active listening format you use and, try to get them to be okay and, seek help. But I did that one time on Christmas Eve. And, was actually pretty good experience for me. I don't know how much it was for them. But it was important because these are people who basically were, moved from the country to the city or from another place to Dallas. And, it was just, they were alone. And, when everybody else was with their family, and all of that sort of reinforced that. And I worry a lot about the young Gen Z types who are, in a lot of ways also without community. And like you said, the social media community is actually not a community. It's sort of an anti-community. And it's really important to find some way to get them to help. Because it's scary to think about it.
Yeah, creative ways to make it okay to be in a community like this. It's still not really acceptable as so much, at least in the DC, the sophisticated DC area, whatever, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, they talk about the fact that there are very few opportunities for our young people to gather. I mean, it used to be that, I guess you'd go to the bowling alley and some of your buddies might be there, or just different places that would happen spontaneously, and it's not available.
Yeah.
And it really is important, even in our community, to figure out, we had that young panel talking to us about what we should do in our church.
And we haven't done much with them since.
No, but it was so important that they were saying there needs to be places for young people to go and either congregate, sit around, talk.
Yeah.
We just don't think about it because most of us had it as given in our lives, but for the young people today, it's not a given. It's not a given.
Yeah, and one of the things that Ryan Birch talked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
Is
gonna
this
say,
very
yeah,
thing,
That
that
point.
the nuns
right,
who basically have some sort of spiritual belief but don't attend church, are outside of that community that they would otherwise if they went to
Yes.
church.
yes,
And we mentioned bowling, I think, as one of the things that came up in that conversation. I just think that it's really, those kinds of opportunities for community, physical community, to be in us with other people is really important. And you almost, sometimes you have to make yourself do it, but it's really important.
Go kidnap them. It's like, you guys are coming at Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
Well, my son has a partner and daughter. so
Yeah,
they kidnap.
Conversely,
Yeah.
though, our young people feel atomized and not connected. But at the same time, all the high school kids are overscheduled. They've got one thing on top of another.
Right.
right,
And if it's not the AP review test, it's the soccer game, and if it's not that, it's Chinese school on Saturday. And what happens is that it's compartmentalized,
right.
purpose-driven, rather than community-driven.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm.
time to just hang out has sort of ceased to be.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
hang
and that's
out,
incredibly
right, it's
important for adolescents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That you either to hang out by yourself and, let everything that's happened this week sort of percolate
Yeah.
and sort itself out, or to talk to one or two trusted friends.
One of the things, like, some of our libraries are doing, because they're one of the few 3/3 spaces that are free, is trying to make some teen spaces so that they can feel like they have a hangout, but a lot, the libraries are, there's older people who are like having a difficult time changing their concept of what a library should be. But Wheaton in
Yeah.
particular has done a pretty good job. They've carved out a room, a media room, so to speak, that has no carpeting. And they do things like have pizza or hot chocolate and just come and play at puzzles or games and just hang out. And the teens can bring their own friends, but you also get mixing of high schools, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And it's interesting, but there aren't very many opportunities like that.
And it's just like that.
And a lot of
And it
people
does.
wondering, how do you do
Andy
that?
Hartman had commented that it takes effort
Yeah,
and maybe to be okay with finding your niche. I mean, you know, I have to, when I get frustrated that my grandchildren don't communicate very clearly or openly, I have to remind myself that, you know,
yeah.
maybe I wasn't that open, although I think I was pretty
Well, they seem
talkative.
to like signal and text messaging an awful lot.
Yeah, yeah, and you go to, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
trying to get a handle on how they do communicate. And is it Snapchat or whatever else that, you know?
And it isn't just the young people who are isolating and lonely.
No,
It's everybody.
It's not.
I mean, it's a serious situation in our country.
You know,
and in the
social
world,
media
then.
leads to that,
Yeah.
so,
It
you know,
really is.
or streaming or whatever, as, you know, we can entertain ourselves.
Right.
But what does that do with our relationships between each other? And,
Yeah.
the challenge.
Somebody had on Facebook about the social media used to be sitting in the rocking chair on the front porch.
Right.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, watching people go by, yeah, talking to each other and, yeah. Yeah, and I have to remember, I let my kids do a lot of stuff that, you know, this day and age, people would be shocked.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, they would, at the age of whatever, they roamed downtown on the metro and
Mhm.
Yeah,
found their friends and
right.
you don't do that. So
When she's 14, I let her do stuff, you know, 14,
Yeah.
15.
My son has two adopted teenagers and go to the mall and movies. They don't
don't
let,
do that
anymore.
they don't let
You don't
them do
do
that.
that
It's
anymore.
it's a different time.
Yeah.
I understand.
the risk is high, you know,
But- You know, people's idea of the risk has changed because everything's 24/7, everybody gets really scared. But the reality is things were actually more dangerous in the
Oh, yeah.
70s than they are today. And yet parents are helicopter, you know, that's the other piece of it.
yeah.
People want to know where their children are all the time and they put them on their phones and, you know, where is my child? And they have to check in with them
Oh, that-
like every 2 hours.
Well, my grandchildren are traced, I mean.
That's what I'm saying.
You know, where they
It's like-
are all the time.
Right.
You know,
Oh,
it's different.
It
I'm glad
is.
I didn't know sometimes. There were some.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alvin comments this too, that our kids in Montgomery County are just so scheduled, so overscheduled, but.
And sadly, a lot of that scheduling involves doing things on Sunday morning.
It does.
That prevents going to church. Yeah.
So I know folks have things to get to, but I can't thank the panel enough for coming up in on a tricky day and sharing this ongoing, opening up conversation, because this is the kind of thing we need to keep, you know,
Okay.
valuing each other. And it's okay to talk about this stuff. I mean, yes, there was stuff I found out about 6, 7 when I went to an elementary school the other day. I didn't know.
6, 7.
So,
You're hip now. You're hip now,
I
girl.
mean, you know, some of us are just too isolated. So, no, but we do need to you know, keep seeing each other, keep appreciating each other. And I'm going to make a special plea that even though it's a really busy season, that you come to Adult Ed next Sunday, because we're going to have a Love Fest party next Sunday. Next Sunday is going to be our an opportunity to celebrate Bradley Hills at Christmas. And we want as many people who can come and share with each other what Christmas at Bradley Hills has meant over the years. The meaningful moments, the funny moments, the different kinds of ways we've celebrated. It's the beginning of a day where we have a brunch at the end, but we want folks to come in and talk about their experiences from way back, from last Christmas, over the years. What are those little things that stick in your mind that have given you hope, that give you a giggle, that have connected you with folks that you didn't see in years and then you saw them during the holidays? Whatever it is, please make time as much as you can, with no guilt, but we want you to come. We want you to join us and celebrate this community that we have. And we thank you so much for being here this morning. All
Thank
of
you.
you. It was just really meaningful. Thanks.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank
Well, thank you guys. This is lovely.
Guys,
Yeah.
it was wonderful. I'm telling you, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Parody to what we all say.
I don't know what our next theme will be, but I know we'll be on time.
Okay, cool.
Orange yellow.
So you said.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Thanks so
Thanks for
much.
being here.
Absolutely.
Band-Aid looks very presidential.
Isn't that impressive?
Very presidential.
Yeah, is that good?
Yeah, that's good.
Really?
The time and the effort you all put in was way off.
Yeah. Thanks.
Pressed you on it, and we came up soon.
She did, she pushed me, I was like,
When I was back.
I do something.
Yeah.
I get a lot of complaints about that pushing, I'll tell you.
Yeah, but it didn't stop. Hey,
Women.
Carol, what time left was clear, this, this, like, and I had no idea what you were saying, but I think I need to turn some. Thank you. So, it's good, it's good.
Every one of your contributions, you were terrific. I mean, really.
Glad we're able to get you for a team.
Well, it's true. I mean, I know I got the best panel in town. I do.
Okay.